I should have chosen the candy more wisely, because now it's stuck in my teeth and I'm just... We'll come to the candy in just a second. But this story, the story that we hear in the gospel reading for today, is often referred to as the widow's mite. It's called that because in the King James Version of the Bible from the 17th century, in the King James Version of the Bible, it refers to the widow putting in 2 mites, which make a farthing. Anybody remember what a farthing is worth, really? A little bit before everyone's time, maybe? Forever? And it doesn't really matter. The point is, it's not very much. It was likely a lepton, which is Greek. It could have been, and the point is, it was not very much. It was very little. It's worth about like a fraction of a penny. I have a couple of issues with this story being called the widow's mite. First of all, as I mentioned, mite comes from the King James Version of the Bible, which would be very relevant to you if you lived in the 17th century. This is not the 17th century, not even in Texas. It is not the 17th century, it's the 21st century. And if we were to tell this story in a more contemporary way, we might say a couple of pennies or, I don't know. Do we still have pennies? We might say nickels or dimes. That should be nickel and diming the treasure. Okay, never mind. The point is, it's very little. But the language that's used to describe this story comes from a different era, and so we might want to consider what's very little these days. The second thing that kind of bothers me about calling it the widow's mite is it focuses on the money. I know what you're thinking right away. This is a church. We focus on the money all the time. But we don't focus on the money all the time. We're just really bad about talking about the money. Really bad sometimes. Because what we do is we say things like what appears to be this story. In fact, this story has traditionally very often been used as a stewardship. No, I can't even call it that. A financial campaign text. You should give just like the widow in this story. Right? Except again, is it really about the money? I don't think this story is about the money at all. I think it's about something bigger and about something that churches also don't like to talk about or don't talk about very well. It's about how bad we are with your money. I'm coming to that before. I hope everybody's visited the offering box before I talk about this. Yeah, or use the donate button online. Yeah, okay. We're not very good. Churches are traditionally not very good about talking about money because we don't feel we should have to. You're giving money to the church. The church is worthy of your money. Except if you're using this story to convince people of that, I'm telling you right now, the point of this story is that the temple was not worthy of her donation. It's kind of the point of the story. The point of this story, if you take just this little fragment, sure, it's about the widow who gives everything she has to the temple. Why is she doing that? First of all, I've got questions about this little piece of the story before we put it in its proper context. First of all, why is she doing that? If we're going to use this as a stewardship story, that is extremely bad stewardship. She's giving everything she has. She'll have nothing to live on. Why is she doing that? She's doing that because she has faith that she's giving that money to God as represented by the temple. Because the temple's job, if it hasn't already been made clear by Jesus 3 seconds before, is the care of widows and orphans. It's in the law. She had faith that she was giving the money in order that she would be cared for, knowing that she would be cared for. That's why she gave everything she had. So, first of all, about those rich people. when we do financial campaigns, I'm still sticking with financial campaigns rather than stewardship, because again, I have issues around questioning what stewardship actually is. When we talk about financial campaigns, we always try to convince you to give from a sense of abundance. We use the A word a lot. Give from a sense of abundance. And here's a story which Jesus criticizes people for giving from their abundance. But I think Jesus' point here isn't that they gave from a sense of abundance. It's that they had an abundance and they gave a fraction of it. Again, I'm questioning that though, because does that mean like rich people are bad because they only give a little of what they have? And I don't think it's that simple. I think it's more a question of what are your priorities and where does it go? And this is where we come back to one of the things that the church is often really bad about, telling you where it goes. We often just resort to, you should support the church financially because it's the church. That's not why you should support the church. It should be, you should support the church because of what it does, what it offers, what it does with what you give. Because that's precisely what's going on here. The widow gives to the temple treasury because she believes the temple is going to do what it's supposed to do. Live the law. Part of that law is that she'll be cared for, along with orphans and the poor and the sick, because that's what they do. I will say, to be fair, a lot of churches have, in the last little while, resorted to narrative budgets. When they tell you what their budget for the year is, or as part of a financial campaign, they tell you exactly what is the money's going towards, which is good, as long as it's clear about what the benefits of that is. Because I can tell you right now, you pay me, right? I'm not embarrassed to say that. A little bit. But I'm not embarrassed to say that. But you don't just pay me. What you do is you support the work that I do as part of the church, just as you support the work that is done by other people that are part of the church. Carrie and Alan previously, and Charlotte in Ponoka, and also the secretary, Charlotte in Ponoka, Graham. I can give you all the names, but that's not the point. The point is what they do. And what they do is ensure that things happen, that the programs that we offer happen, that we reach out to people in the community, particularly the people who are part of our church community, but also the wider community. It supports the message that we share with you every week that encourages you to be part of your community in a positive way. It supports keeping the lights on and the care of the buildings, but that's not the point. The point is that because the building is cared for and the lights are on and the heat's on, things can happen here. And that's things that are partnerships with other organizations in the community. That's things that are our theater groups, which themselves aren't just about providing a show to the community. It's about creating community amongst themselves. That's what we need to talk about when we start talking about where all of the money goes. It's not just about giving to the institution, it's about the responsibility of the institution to live into that. And we haven't always, and we don't always, and that is part of what's going on in this story. Because the wider context of the story isn't just about the widow putting the money into the treasury. The wider context of the story is why Jesus and the disciples are sitting where they are and are able to see it. In fact, the wording in the Gospel of Mark is entirely appropriate when you read the story previous to this one. It says that Jesus and the disciples sat down opposite the temple, opposite the treasury. Because right before this, we've heard Jesus have a little rant about the scribes, the people whose job it is to do the very things that the widow believes are going to happen, and that's why she's giving everything that she can. Jesus had a little rant about these guys because they're not doing their job. The language that he uses, of course, reflects, the period and the time, but essentially what he's trying to say is they do the show, but they don't do their job. They do not walk the talk, in other words. They take advantage. They ensure that they have the nicest robes and the nicest places to live and the jets, without necessarily following through on what it is that they're supposed to be doing with people, the care that they're supposed to be giving to people. It makes no sense to me to talk about this as a story that's about giving without also considering how we honor the giving or don't. Particularly, here we are, Remembrance Day is on Thursday. We have one day set aside in the year to remember. We call it Remembrance Day. And please, by all means, on Remembrance Day, it is a time and a place to remember those who have given their lives, the sacrifices that were made, the people who have suffered. But there are 364 other days in the year in which we need to honor that by living out what the point of that was. Just as at the end of September, when we had our first National Indigenous Peoples Day on what was previously Orange Shirt Day, it's great to have the one day. But what are we doing the other 364? Are we living into that? Let me take this even one step further. If you happen to be having a birthday, it's great to celebrate the day of your birth. It's great. But are you celebrating your birth the other 364 days of the year? In other words, are you living into your life? I think that's what this story is about. It's not just about the money. It's easy to make it about that. It is, just to take that one little piece and go, we should all give everything we have. So please, everybody, give everything you have. I'm sure I can make good use of it. But that's not the point. The point is how we honor that kind of a sacrifice. The point is how we honor that kind of a giving. That kind of a gift. Are we living into, this is tricky language, but I'm going to say, are we living into the gift which we have all been given by the sacrifice that others have made? Are we honoring that? It's an interesting thing. Particularly when you try and put that in the context of this story that Jesus tells, or any of the stories that Jesus tells. Because those stories are always a balance between the one and the many. If we only ever live into the sacrifice that was made so that I can be free, we have not honored that at all. Because it's about how we can be. It's about how we all can be free and what that means. What that means. And we learn more every day about what that means. Particularly when we find ourselves in struggles between I and we. And that's again, here's Jesus, and he's seeing this one poor widow putting everything she has into the treasury after he's just had a little rant about those rich scribes taking advantage. In fact, the very mention of widows in the Gospels is usually a code for anybody who's marginalized or poor, the sick, anyone requiring care and attention, anyone that we should be engaging with that we always try so hard not to. And he's just been talking about how the scribes don't do that. Instead, they devour widows' houses. For what purpose? Their shiny robes and their important seats at the banquet. That's not what it's for. We, as a community, need to honor these things that we hold up on a day, every day. We, as a community, need to live into the promise of that. We as a community need to live beyond me and recognize the power of community. It's not just this one widow who needs to be cared for. It's the many that Jesus is always encountering. We hear a story perhaps, about Jesus and somebody who's sick and being healed. Jesus and somebody who's poor. Jesus and somebody who has a need. And we hear this story as Jesus helps one person. How many stories do you think there are like that? Don't you think there's a moment at which the gospel writers kind of went, we're going to use this one story to cover these 5,000 instances of this happening? Because otherwise we're just going to get repetitive and, But that's just it. It's not repetitive. Every one of those moments helps an individual within the community, brings them back to a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, a sense of being part of something. That's the point here. And it's not just a critique of that. It's not just Jesus saying, look at this, these guys are not doing their job. I think it's Jesus trying to be encouraging. The widow's might, if you want, M-I-G-H-T, her real power is to remind us both to have faith in the community and also to remind us as a community to honor the faith that is given to the community. It's what we're for. It's what these new moments, these rememberings are for. Remember, we reconnect. We re-engage in order that we can create this new moment of life and go forward and make things